Okay, welcome everybody. So my name is Johannes. Welcome back to those who were already with us yesterday. Today we will go to session 2 of our Combar meeting with a focus on sociologic and economic aspects. As I said yesterday, we are now over halfway with our action. We got the news that likely our action will be extended, but we don't know for sure, but we hope to be running for 2 more years. But still, it's a good time to stand still now after 3 years of activity to see where we stand and see if we can, from our contacts and from our interactions, start to define recommendations and wrap up insights. For this, we will need many inputs from all of you here today, not only from scientists, but also from people working in industry, from farming organizations, from veterinary organizations. So please, I hope also with these meetings, we have an opportunity to interact with you and to collect inputs from different angles. How we will do that, as you can see on the slide, we will try to interact with you via Mentimeter. So you go to menti.com in a web browser, and there's 2 ways. Either you can enter your answers on question from the moderator, and we will show the results at the end of our session today. Or also, if you have questions to the speakers, you can press the button Ask a Question, and your questions will appear there, and the moderator will aim to pick up some questions addressed there. Please note, however, we will not be able to address all or most comments made within the time frame, but be assured that all the questions and inputs are important to us and will be used for the meeting report. Then only some practical notes. Can I have the next slide? So for people from the UK wishing to apply for CBD points, according to the procedures, please email your name now to Hannah Vinier. So you can claim your points.
Sorry, Johannes.
Yes.
I can't see your slides now.
Yes, Edwin is sharing them. So I see them.
I don't see them. Shit, what's going on?
Anyone else who has trouble seeing the slides?
No, I can see them too.
I can see them.
I can see them.
Yes.
I can see them.
I see them well.
Yeah, it's okay.
I have to seek assistance. Sorry.
Okay, so then for other housekeeping rules, I would suggest for practical technical issues, you can maybe use a chat box, and we will try to solve them if needed. Also, your name, it's important to us to keep track of the records so that we know who attended this meeting. So please make sure that your full name is written in the participant list. Or if you don't succeed in writing your full name, please leave a message also in the chat box, writing your full name and your country so that we know who was here with us today. Further, please, if you this meeting will be recorded for your knowledge. We will make available all the recordings somewhere in the month of January, likely. And please, if you're not presenting, mute your video and your microphone for an optimal experience. With this, I'd like to give the word to Edwin and wish you an enjoyable meeting.
Yeah, you didn't specifically mention this one, I think, Johannes, but I think everyone from the UK has had the opportunity now to read this slide. So if you need CPD points, you can use your presence in these sessions, the sessions of yesterday and today, to earn points for AMTRA. More information can be asked from Hannah email address is on the slide. So welcome in session 2 of the Joint Combar Working Group meeting. Session 2 is about understanding the socio-economic aspects of sustainable worm control. And I'm very happy to co-chair this working group together with Dave Bartley from the Morden Research Institute. This is the program. I'll first give a brief introduction. Then Dr. Maria Szabo will give a keynote lecture. She will be introduced later to you by Dave. The keynote lecture will be followed by 3 short presentations by Johannes Charlier, Fiona Van De Velde, and Maiken Grafdal. And then these presentations will be followed by the 1-minute poster presentations by presenters from the University of Évora, University of León, and University of Paraná. Finally, we will have a lively discussion moderated by 4 participants, which I will present to you later this morning again. Please don't forget that the other posters, which will not be presented this morning, can be found in the poster booklet, and that also the abstracts of all the posters, including those that will not be presented today, can be found in the abstract book. Both are available on the website of Combar. So the objective or the objectives of this working group were to develop, disseminate, and apply methods to study the economics and the human behavior factors that are applicable in the field of sustainable helminth control in ruminants. There was a training component, as you can see in task 2.1 and task 2.3. I will come to that later. So training participants in the principles and methods in economics in animal health, and training participants on communication science relevant to animal health. The research in working group 2 was focused on 2 components. There was studying the economic effects of novel parasite control approaches. And the second pillar of the research in our working group was to study factors that affect farmer behavior with regard to helminth control in ruminants, and use that information to develop a communication strategy to promote sustainable helminth control methods in sheep, goat, and cattle farmers. The training was taken care of in a workshop in 2018, which combined both training tasks. So people were trained in the principles and the methods in economics of animal health, and also trained in socio-psychological research that is relevant to animal health. And that workshop was held in Bruges, Belgium, at the end of 2018. And we had 25 participants and 7 trainers involved in this workshop, which I think was very successful. The first part of the research on the economic impact of helminth infections, that was driven and coordinated by Johannes Charlier. This part, he organized a survey to collect data in order to estimate the economic impact of helminth infections, the economic impact also of Antalmintic resistance in Europe, and to compare these numbers with the investment in research and extension services by the member states and by the EU itself. 17 countries or member countries participated in the survey. The survey resulted in an estimate of the burden of helminth infections in ruminants, and also the costs associated with Antalmintic resistance. However, also some data gaps were identified, and the conclusion is that further refinements are needed that take into account some uncertainty in the data and also some geographic differences. The final goal is to integrate those data in a general framework that can be used to compare the economic impact of helminth diseases with other animal health issues for targeted policy making. I think that's a very important part, because one of the findings from this study was that the endemic helminth diseases, the economic effect of them is in the same magnitude, order of magnitude, as some of the more spectacular episodic viral diseases. despite the fact that our helminth infections are often staying under the radar because they obviously usually don't cause spectacular outbreaks. I'm not going into detail in this table, of course, but it just illustrates that a number of 17 countries participated. The treatment costs were estimated for all of these countries. Also, the costs related to Antalmintic resistance were estimated and were then compared with the annual research budget on these topics in the different member states. I will not show you the results in detail because that will be done by Johannes Charlier, who will give a short presentation on this research later this morning. And I would like to invite you to stay to listen to that. The second part of the research was on farmer behavior intention. The starting point were two published studies. On the right, you can see a study that was published on factors that affect sheep farmers or the intention of sheep farmers to adopt the guidelines of SCOPS. Secondly, there was a study in dairy farmers in Belgium where the intention of dairy farmers was investigated to adopt diagnostics for helminth control rather than using blanket treatments. And those two studies were used as the basis for our research in Working Group 2 on farmer behavior, because we wanted to know whether the results that were obtained in sheep farmers in the UK and in dairy cattle farmers in Belgium, whether or not they would be representative for dairy farmers and sheep farmers in Europe. And to investigate that, we organized a questionnaire survey because we wanted to know whether these data from the UK and Belgium could be extrapolated to the rest of Europe, which would be nice because that would mean we could develop a common communication strategy for all of Europe, or alternatively, whether factors that influence farmer behavior would be different in different parts of Europe, necessitating a more targeted approach, communication approach for different parts of Europe. A number so all the participants in Working Group 2 were invited to participate in this questionnaire survey. A number of countries volunteered to participate. So our questionnaires from the pilot studies in the UK and Belgium were then translated into the respective languages of these individual countries, were then back translated independently to have a quality control. So the back translation was then compared with the original to make sure that the questions that were asked in the different countries were exactly the same questions as the questions that were asked in the dairy study in Belgium and the sheep study in the UK originally. And here you can see the list of some countries only participated in the dairy study, others only in the sheep study. Some countries participated in both. And you can see there is quite some variability in the farmer responses despite substantial efforts of the participants to engage with the farmers. In total, more than almost 1,300 farmers, dairy farmers responded to the survey, and almost 3,000 sheep farmers responded to the survey. I will not present the results, basically because not all the data have been analyzed yet. The preliminary results of the cattle study will be presented by Fiona Van De Velde later this morning, and the data of the sheep survey in Europe have been collated and are now being cleaned and being analyzed, and we hope to have these results in the first quarter of next year. So this is the structure, just an introduction to give you the structure of Working Group 2 activities, and now we will proceed to the communications, to the presentations of Working Group 2, and I would like to invite my co-chair Dave Bartley to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Maria Szabo.
Yes, it's my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker this morning. It's Maria Szabo from the World Organization for Animal Health, or OIE. She's had a long list of jobs and activities that she's run. She is a vet that graduated from the University of Budapest in Hungary. She worked in the public sector for almost 15 years at the Directorate of Veterinary Medicines in Hungary. She was seconded during that time to work in London for the European Medicines Agency. And over the last 5 years, she's worked for the OIE. And one of the jobs has been the Secretariat for Registration of Diagnostic Kits. So a pleasure to introduce her to talk about the OIE's activities on antiparasitic resistance. So with that, I'll pass over. Thank you very much.
So very good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for this nice introduction. And I would like, first of all, thanks to the organizers to invite OIE for this very important meeting. And I am very pleased to be giving this presentation on behalf of the OIE Electronic Expert Group on antiparasiticals. There are main part of my presentation. The first is a feedback from the OIE focal point training seminar. The second is a concept note to create an electronic expert group on antiparasitic resistance. And the third is the objective of the group to create a document on prudent and responsible use of antiparasitic resistance. And the fourth is a survey which we conducted recently in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. But before that, I would like to talk about the OIE, which is an intergovernmental organization, and the main mandate is to improve animal health and welfare worldwide. And that was founded in 1924. And the OIE kept the acronym, the original name, so that's the Office International des Epizooties, so that's we are OIE, not World Animal Health Organization, anonym kept. And that is very important that we have 182 member countries, and each member countries has a delegate who is legally responsible to participate in the work and represent the countries. And that's all delegates are supported by 8 fields for national focal point, including veterinary product. And we are working for 19 partner organizations, and we have 263 reference laboratories. And also we have a very strong network with our regional offices. The headquarters is in Paris. So now I would like to speak about the feedback as we received from the OIE focal point training seminar for veterinary product, because that is related to the work of the antiparasitics works. So in 2015, that was my first mission in Uganda, when we presented the different guidelines and standards to the focal point to the attendees. And one focal point question that why we do not have OIE standard and guideline, prudent and responsible use for antiparasitics. And that was a broad agreement among the attendees that yes, we need to work on this subject. So we repeated also for the seminar for Asia in Tokyo in 2016, and for Europe, for the whole Europe, not just for the European Union, for the whole Europe in Budapest, and the Middle East in Beirut in 2016 and 2017. And as the result, we decided we go further, so included the subject, the challenges of antiparasitic drugs and resistance for the next cycle, in order to seek the view on this topic and interactive panel discussion. This panel discussion built upon 2 very simple pivotal questions. The first, do we need the OIE standards and guidelines on prudent and responsible use for antiparasitics? And the second, is that relevant for the 5 region global the world? And that was all training seminar expressed a deep-rooted desires on interest to work together to tackle antiparasitic resistance. including English-speaking Africa in 2017, in Asia 2018, also in Europe, also in French-speaking Africa, and for the Americas region in Mexico. The meeting in Mexico, it was concluded that urgent action is needed, led by the OIE. On this slide, you can see the main challenges which come from altogether from the world in a short summary. There are still challenges to overcome. There is resistance to many antiparasitics, especially trypanoside, ascaris, and Antalmintics, and lack of effective drugs. And secondly, because there are many generic products that have been used more than 15 years and no enough new quality drugs available. I'm very pleased that Dr. Barbara Cyrus is also among us from the European Medicine Agency, and hopefully tomorrow she would also can give you more information about a current tendency in the European Medicine Agency concerning this aspect, because Europe is usually in advance on that subject. But as we also face that there are poor quality products on the market, probably this is not a surprise for you that there are on the market substandard and falsified products, and not just in Africa, but also in Asia and also in Latin America as well. And the consequences, there are products with subtherapeutic doses and low concentration of active ingredient. Also, that is a well-known problem everywhere now in the world, that are also antiparasitic residue in the environment, especially with ivermectin, but also there are residue in the food due to the inappropriate withdrawal period. I'm also very happy that industry people also are participating in this meeting, and with the collaboration with national competent authority, this situation can be improved in the future. But as we faced in many member countries, that there is a lack of legislation of authorizing veterinary medicines, and also in Africa there are poor enforcements of appropriate authorization of veterinary medicines. So after this 4th and 5th cycle seminar, I try to make a summary and prepare the concept note indicating that the feedback from the OIE members, they wanted that the OIE work on prudent and responsible use for antiparasitics. And this concept note was endorsed by the Director General in 2019. An electronic group was set up with the geographical balance. That means that all regions presented, and the members have been chosen from the 5th cycle seminar, who knows very well also the framework, or a little bit, or the OIE, and also the great expert on their field. We also invited the European Medicine Agency to work as the observer. And again, I'm very happy that Barbara tomorrow will present also their view on that, and can comment this presentation if she would like to do that. So the main objective of the group, as a first step, to prepare a document on responsible and prudent use for Antalmintics, which is limited for food-producing animals, and the publication is expected this summer, the next year, 2021. Because it's obvious for us that is very important because of economical reason, because there is a big threat on animal health and also for food production and food security. So in order to feed this document, a survey was conducted in order to obtain information worldwide, in order to respond globally to these challenges. So the first survey is conducted in Asia, and we discussed it in Kuala Lumpur in January 2020 in a lively interactive discussion. And that was Professor Nick Sangster who participated and led this discussion, a great expert from Australia. And after, due to the COVID, we conducted a questionnaire in Africa in June and July, and we wrote an article with Professor Bati from Senegal, from the Dakar University, and Professor Patrick Woodrico from Uganda. Both of them, they are representing the French-speaking and the English-speaking Africa with the joint African view. Now we are on the way of publishing another article in the OIE Bulletin concerning the result from the Middle East. So if you are interested in, there is a link that you can read in detail our result. And if you would have any obstacle to join, just send an email to the organizers, and I will assist. I'm happy to assist to subscribe for this OIE news, and you can read, or also I can send it to the organizer, the article, and also for the next article concerning the Middle East region. We just had a 3 days meeting seminar for the focal point. That was the reason why yesterday I was not able to participate, and we also included to discuss and show the result for our focal point in the Middle East. So this questionnaire, as I said, that was developed by the electronic working group and focus on antalmantic resistance. Our aim is to extend, but we would like to go step by step. And this questionnaire now is focused on to capture what are the most economically important animal species, to have information on Antalmantica resistance status, the use of diagnostics, also availability of information on Antalmantic resistance. Very important, rating the country regulatory environment for Antalmantics to see the quality of Antalmantics, and also to identify what are the biggest knowledge gaps in the country. On this slide is just a summary to make it clear about the aspect of the questionnaire. It's, as I mentioned before, I am not repeating that. But the result was very obvious for us, for the Asia, French-speaking Africa, English-speaking Africa, Middle East, the most important species are cattle, and for English-speaking Africa, plus goats, and for Middle East, cattle and goats and sheep. And the biggest knowledge gap is the diagnosis of resistance. In Africa, our colleagues indicated that is linked to the lack of resources, funding laboratory staff, but also interest for among researchers in this area. It's quite simple in the Middle East as well. So to conclude my presentation, more information and research is needed based on the identified gaps. Also, we need to awareness on antiparasitical resistance. We need to develop a guideline and standard, prudent and responsible use of antiparasiticals. More capacity for diagnosis is needed. And we need to collaborate, and underline collaborate, just to repeat that, for different stakeholders. And that's also why I'm very happy and pleased and privileged to participate in this meeting. But also I would like to acknowledge the work, the electronic expert group on antiparasiticals for the colleagues, and also for the OIE focal points, basically worldwide, who are participating in this project, and also the regional colleagues who are facilitated to have response and working together. So thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any question if you might have, if I am able to that. If not, I will also pass to our group, because I am not the expert. I am working as a secretary for this group. So thank you very much again for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Szabo, for your interesting keynote presentation. We do have some questions in the Mentimeter forum. First question I would like to ask is, who are the participants at these regional OIE seminars? do most of those participants have a government background, or is it farmers or veterinarians, or is it a mixture?
Thank you very much. That is a very good question. I thought that I would include a slide to explain a little bit, because this structure is very special. As I mentioned, that there is a delegate who is normally the chief veterinary officer, who is represent one country in the OIE. And the focal point for the veterinary product, it's sometimes working for the ministry, sometimes somebody who is working for the basically the government, for a national competent authority, but the majority, they are vet, and their main role, main job is to support the chief veterinary officer related to the veterinary medicinal veterinary product, which included pharmaceuticals, vaccines, and diagnostics. And they have different background. They are working different organization, and that's also in our project in terms of the falsified and substandard product, to find out also the background for the communication of this focal point for which governmental organization are working for. I don't know, is that answer to your question?
It's difficult. I think so. It's difficult to judge by me because I didn't ask the question. I just read it to you. But I guess it is. And if it's not, I assume that the people who ask questions in Mentimeter will get a response afterwards. So that's as Johannes already explained in the beginning. All of you that ask questions in Mentimeter, thanks a lot for asking these questions. But we know that we cannot answer all of them right now, but we will try to do that after the meeting. I have another question here that got several votes. Is what should be done so only one document on best practices or prudent use of antiparasitics would be promoted worldwide? Because nowadays there are so many.
Yes, just go back to the first question, because that came up from yesterday from the Middle East. So one delegate addressed that based on the network, we need to improve also the channel to have the more precise, more accurate answer to any questionnaire. And this is also the question of the communication of the focal point and the relevant organization and university. So I think it was a very important addition. So the added value for the best practice guide to use Antalmintics, what would be the added value? That is your question?
No, the question was rather, I'll go back to the question, yes, just to make sure I got it right. What could be done to produce a single guideline or document on best practices in using antiparasitics worldwide, rather than having several of them like we seem to do now?
Well, that's actually our aim to produce worldwide a document on prudent and responsible use for antiparasiticals, including Antalmintics, because basically this type of document is, if it will be done, that will be adopted by 182 member countries. That means it should apply for 182 member countries. That is the case for antibiotics. And now everybody is talking about antimicrobial resistance. So we don't like to wake up too late. We would like to start to work now in order to respond to this challenge. So we are not planning to produce this type of document. We would like to address it worldwide in a frame of antiparasiticals.
Okay, thank you. Given the time frame, I will end with the last questions, and the other questions we will keep for feedback after the Combar meeting. A question that many people tagged as interesting was, how can Combar contribute in developing the guidelines, given that most people that well, at least in Europe, that are involved in research on Antalmintic resistance are part of Combar, and also some people from outside Europe are tightly related to Combar. for example, through the Livestock Helminth Research Alliance, LIRA, which is a worldwide organization which is tightly linked with Combar. So how do you think we could contribute to the OIE guidelines?
That was my question to myself as well when I prepared myself for this presentation. So that one I would propose to my hierarchy to invite one representative to our electronic expert group and involve in the in the next step before the publication, if it's possible, if not after, but it is not my decision, but I would like to propose to invite a representative from the whole group to our electronic expert group. And personally, I would really appreciate this input, because you are a specialist on that field.
Okay, thank you for your clear answer. Maybe a quick final question. I can see we're still 2 minutes running in front of the schedule. What can be the role of the industry when it comes to slow down resistance development, in your opinion?
Well, actually, also in terms of industry, in the beginning, I worked for the AMR working group, and we had a representative from industry. At the moment, it's not that case. I would also propose to involve industry this type of work as well, one representative via the House for Animals to participate in the work, because it is a joint work, and the responsibility of the industry to actually have development for new drugs, to produce a good quality, assured, safe and efficient drugs. That would be a very simple answer to you. But also as a stakeholder, I think it will be a very, very relevant role for the industry representative in this group as well.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Szabo, for your presentation and for your engagement in the discussion. Thank you very much. I hope you can stay around for questions maybe at the end if we still have time in the discussion forum. But for now, I would like to invite now the first speaker for the short oral presentations. And this is Johannes Scherlier, which you should all know by now, from CreaVet. And he will give a presentation on the initial assessment of the economic burden of major parasitic helminth infections to the ruminant livestock industry in Europe.
Thank you also for having this presentation here. As I mentioned, it's a joint effort from a lot of working group 2 members in our action. And as you say, it's as Edwin already introduced, it's what we call an initial assessment of the economic burden of helminth infections to the ruminant livestock industry in Europe. The word initial is probably important because I will not have much time to go in detail on that today because of time constraints, but of course there's a lot of improvement areas possible to our estimate, but still it's the best we can get today. So when I was about starting to do research in this area, I remember having this paper from Ronald Kaminski, who was working at Novartis at the time, Drug Resistance in Nematodes, a paper tiger or a real problem? In other words, is it a problem of scientists who sometimes like to create a problem to motivate their research, or is it a real problem in the field? Already at that time, the author concluded that it was becoming a real problem. Since then, almost 20 years have passed, and actually the level of resistance has only increased both quantitatively, geographically, and also in ruminant species. And this has been nicely captured by the new paper which is out since, I believe, yesterday or 2 days, by Hannah Rose Finier as another Combar output publication, where basically all the available studies in the literature have been summarized and clearly showing that today, for instance, the level of ML resistance in cattle is as high in cattle as in sheep. So, okay, we have a problem. That's not nice. But what can we do about it? What are the solutions? One part of the solution is, of course, communication, raising awareness, communicating on sustainable practices as we know them today. But the next presentation, we are doing that. We are trying to do that. And the next presentation will cover that in more detail. Another thing we can do is policy intervention, and there's more and more agreement, I think, in the scientific community, at least, that there could be need for a higher level of policy intervention. On one side, by making more, let's say, stricter rules to help implement best practice management. For instance, making it some kind of obligatory to make a diagnosis before taking treatment decisions, just as an example. But another component of policy intervention is also develop research in innovation programs so that we can come up with new solutions, be it in the form of vaccines, new resistance breaking Antalmintics, nutraceuticals, or any other new knowledge that can help in breaking Antalmintic resistance. However, if we call for policy intervention, what you need is economics to motivate why you call for it. And we were of course, in the unique opportunity now with our cost action that we have a wide network of experts across all of Europe, and we can use that network to collect country level information, because a lot of data is available in public repositories such as animal population size, etc. But a whole lot of information is not available in public repositories, or it could be available in literature, but for instance, not on a country level estimate. So we need experts to interpret the data and say what it means in concrete terms. The methods we used were quite straightforward. So it was basically a simple spreadsheet model, and that models the cost of disease as a function of disease frequency, infection intensity, the effects of disease on mortality and productivity, but also the human efforts to respond to the disease. We started from the Paracalc framework, which was previously developed for a farm level, as a farm level tool, and only in dairy cattle, and we extended that model to include other parasites such as bovine lungworm, but especially to include other species such as beef cattle, dairy sheep, meat sheep, and dairy goats. And also, rather than a farm level model, now we estimated the effects on the country level, so which is of course very different. Other considerations on the methodology, what we also did is we took into account access to pasture. This is more and more, especially in dairy cattle. They have quite restricted access to pasture in many countries. Some data are available on that, and we included that in our estimates. If animals are not having access to pasture, they of course cannot have infection with helminths, in most of the cases at least, and so they can also not suffer production losses. Another important consideration was, for the first time, we tried to assess the effects of the economic impact of Antalmintic resistance. If we want to do that, we have to know what is the effect of the use of a non-fully warmer versus a fully effective warmer. Now, more and more studies are available. There are still not many, but at least I believe there are now about 4 or 5 studies on this topic. And more or less all these studies point today in the same direction, that when you compare production impact on the use of a fully effective warmer versus a partially effective warmer, there are impacts at the level around 15%. And so this is the number we used to estimate differences in production losses and treatment costs. Very important, what I would like to stress also, we modeled this, the effects of antalmintic resistance. We disaggregated that from the overall cost of infection, because antalmintic resistance is not the primary problem. The primary problem is the cost of the disease and the burden of the infection. And antalmintic resistance is a secondary problem. And it's very important to see this together and not only antalmintic resistance. So these are very succinct results at the EU level. So the total loss, annual loss, was estimated at 1.8 billion. 81% was due to production losses. 19% was due to treatment costs. Of course, there were large differences between countries, between Helminth species, and also between production sectors. For instance, for Helminth species, the highest costs were attributed to nematodes, closely followed by liver fluke, and then further of bovine lungworm. These are the costs of ML resistance. So we estimated that the annual costs today would be around 38 million per year, with the highest costs occurring in dairy cattle, then beef cattle, and then the small ruminants. Now, this was actually a surprising result to many parasitologists. Why? Because traditionally, yes, antalmintic resistance is considered mainly a problem and is also more visible in sheep. So this was thought probably to have higher, but when you express it economically, because the economic output value of the cattle sector is much bigger than that of the small ruminant sector. Certainly when you look at it at a European level, also the impact of resistance is much bigger in these sectors. Now, what are the next steps? Now we have these figures. First of all, of course, I would like, and we will see, we will see if there's opportunity to include this kind of approaches in a wider exercise where we can compare the costs with other diseases. And there is currently also going on the Global Burden of Animal Diseases initiative by Professor Jonathan Rushton, who is also, I think, involvement of the OIE in that. And it would be nice if we can include Helminth also with in this larger framework. But already today, I think with our numbers, even if they are imperfect and there's many gaps, please read the paper if the gap, I think they can start to inform policies. Which are the production sectors? Which are the Helminth species? Which are the regions where the largest impact can be made, or where we could target our efforts? And talking about efforts and investments, what we did also in these studies is we collected all the known public research investment on the topic of Helminth control over a period of 10 years. So the result was that when you express it on an annual basis, 2.7 million euro of public money is invested every year in the topic of research on Helminth control. It's quite a lot of money. It's 3 million euro every year. However, when you express it as a ratio compared to the annual burden of the diseases, this represents only 0.15%. Now, the EU, for instance, states that if the EU wants to stay competitive in a global economy, we need to invest 3% of our annual turnover in research and innovation. I'm thinking maybe we should come up with the same figure for animal disease control. If we know that the disease is costing us every year so much, how much should we invest every year also in innovation, in research, to keep pace with the disease? Because we know as we have also seen with Corona, that diseases evolve and we need continual investment to keep pace with evolving diseases. And then as a final slide, some comparisons. This is, of course, this may be a dangerous exercise to compare because there can be many caveats why you shouldn't compare, but still I did it. So the above line, Helminth, these are results from our study. The costs that resulted in our study of Helminth in the Netherlands, Germany, France, and the UK. And below, I listed some figures from the literature on other diseases in the same countries where they are available. Now, what this exercise suggests is that, yes, endemic diseases such as Helminth infections or mastitis often cost as many or are even higher than the more episodic diseases such as foot and mouth disease or in a while. So actually you have to spread the costs often over different years, or also zoonotic diseases. So clearly this suggests there is still room for continual investment in the control of these endemic diseases, and not only in the episodic diseases. And as there will be a lot of benefits to the control of these diseases. With that, I would like to thank first all contributors, which are listed here. I would like to invite you to also, for further details, read the paper. And I would like to thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
So now I would like to invite the next speaker, Fiona Van De Velde, from both the Norwegian university. I don't know the exact name of NMBU. It's the Life Sciences School of the University of Oslo. And Fiona will give you the correct name in a second. And it's a joint effort with Ghent University. And she will give you a presentation on barriers and incentives for uptake of diagnostics for sustainable worm control by European dairy cattle farmers. And so she will give part of the results of Working Group 2 output in Combar.
I'm Fiona. Hi, welcome. Thank you, Edwin, for introducing me. I work at the Norwegian University of Life Sciences, the NMBU, and University of Ghent. So today I will present to you the results of our joint efforts from Work Group 2 in Combar. And our study is called Barriers and Incentives for the Uptake of Diagnostics for Sustainable Worm Control by European Dairy Cattle Farmers. And as we have heard already many times today and yesterday, Antalmintic resistance is reported in dairy cows throughout Europe and is rising. So targeted treatments and targeted selective treatments are becoming essential strategies, and there's also the adoption of diagnostics on dairy farms. However, the uptake of the efforts to promote sustainable control have been insufficient, which means that farmers haven't been adopting diagnostics or these targeted treatments as we wanted them to adopt. And now we can ask ourselves why. So why are farmers not behaving or acting in the way that we want them to behave? What are the factors that are actually influencing farmers' decision-making on the uptake of diagnostics of other sustainable worm control practices on dairy farms? And as Edwin introduced before, this was already a question that we asked several years ago. And we did some research and identified several factors that could influence this adoption of sustainable practices in Flanders. And so we wanted to know whether these results, whether we were able to extrapolate these results for the whole of Europe. And we wanted to implement a similar study throughout the rest of Europe to measure whether farmers engage in the same way in decision making as they do in Belgium, and as the results that we reported earlier. So to do so, we developed a conceptual behavioral framework. This behavioral framework was measured through surveys, multilingual surveys. And we analyzed our results through structural equation modeling, and afterwards tried to do a multi-group analysis. But I will go in much more detail now. So our development of a conceptual behavioral framework was based on different disciplines. And as I said before, this was also informed by previous studies, but not only the previous studies that we did in Belgium, but also other studies such as a study in small ruminants in the UK, or with horse owners in the UK by Hannah Rose as well. The disciplines that we used here are coming from a social science part, so the behavioral psychology and behavioral economy, but also from veterinary parasitology and insights from social veterinary epidemiology, which is a rather novel discipline. This has led us to develop a conceptual behavioral framework in which we identified several factors that could influence farmers' decision-making on the adoption of diagnostics. This framework was afterwards measured through a survey. And as you see here, I will explain to you briefly, and I think that Edwin also introduced this, how we developed the survey. So each factor that we included in our model was measured through a set of questions. So in English, I will take the example of attitude towards diagnostics. So in English, we had 3 different questions to measure attitude towards diagnostics. But since we wanted to send this survey through different countries, we had to translate it into the country's original language. So for example, here in Norway, we had to translate it in Norwegian. But to be sure that we were measuring the same things throughout all the countries, we had to back translate it. So we had to translate a Norwegian survey back to in English and then compare. It's called B-translation of a survey. So we had to compare whether the original English version was matching the new English version. And if this was all right, and if there were no significant differences, then the survey in Norwegian was accepted. But if we saw that there were many significant differences that could measure other items or other thoughts by farmers, they had to be translated again. And so we repeated this process several times until we had similar surveys throughout all the participating countries. These 4 countries, of course, there were many countries that participated, but only these 4 countries had sufficient amount of a data collection. And just briefly, we actually we pooled the data from Germany and Austria, and we labeled it into Central Europe. So as you see here, we collected this was the data collection of all the participating farmers. But after data cleaning, we had to reduce the amount of participants due to, for example, due to missing data. So farmers that didn't fill in the whole questionnaire, or missing data that was not at random, so questions that they didn't want to answer. So we had to exclude some data in the analysis, but this is the final set. We labeled it Northern Europe, Central Europe, and Southern Europe. And after structural equation modeling, we could find this result for Northern Europe. And okay, this model seems quite complex, but I will guide you through it. As you see here, we can see that there are green lines, red lines, and dashed arrows. So the green arrows have a positive effect, the red arrows a negative effect, and the dashed arrows represent an insignificant effect, so no effect. Our adoption intention that we measured is actually the adoption intention of diagnostic methods on the dairy farms. And as we see here, attitude towards diagnostics had the largest, because it has the thickest arrow, had the largest effect, positive effect on this adoption intention. And so attitude is actually the evaluation, so the positive or negative evaluation of this behavior based on underlying beliefs, such as, for example, animal welfare, animal health, production, milk yield, or as we have measured here, a default bias, which means that whether the farmers are content with their current treatment and whether they want to change their current treatment. So we saw that they were quite pleased with their current treatment, and this had a negative effect on their attitude towards diagnostics. but eventually this had a positive effect on their adoption intention. So this was a very important factor. Secondly, we see attitude of Antalmantics. So as their current treatment has a positive effect on their attitude, but attitude towards Antalmantics, so the way if they feel positive towards Antalmantics, had a negative effect on the adoption intention of diagnostics. We see here as well that subjective norms, which is the perceived opinion of significant others, had also a positive effect on this adoption intention. And as we see here, bandwagon bias, which means that bandwagon is the total environment. So other farmers had their opinion was valued very much. And this opinion had an effect on whether they wanted to engage in that behavior, yes or no. Perceived severity and perceived susceptibility is the threat of anthelmintic resistance, had no effect on their adoption intention. Eventually, we were also able to measure self-reported adoption, so whether they already engaged in the adoption of diagnostics and how many times. And as we see here, adoption intention actually didn't have an effect on this self-reported adoption, but the community did. So this means that actually farmers are engaging in a behavior due to what the community around them is doing. So these were the results for the northern part of Europe. And here you don't see many differences, but this is the central part of Europe. This is quite similar. So we found quite similar results. The only thing that I can add is that the behavioral control norms, whether the farmer perceived they are in control of that behavior, whether the behavior is easy to implement, or whether they have the sufficient tools to implement the behavior, had a positive effect on this adoption intention as well for Central Europe. And this was perceived knowledge, so whether they thought they had sufficient knowledge of diagnostics, had of course a positive effect on whether they were able to implement diagnostics. This for Central Europe. And then Southern Europe, so Italy, we weren't able to measure all the other factors because our model didn't fit. But what we did found is that actually attitude in Southern Europe had no effect on this adoption intention. What did have an effect was anthelmintic resistance and actually the perceived severity, whether they thought that anthelmintic resistance was a severe threat. This had an effect on their adoption intention of diagnostic tools. So these were our results and these were our models, but we wanted to do a multi-group analysis, and this was not possible. So what we were not able to do, we can only present the models as we have found them, but we actually cannot make any significant, we cannot say statistically significant differences. So we can suggest that there are differences, but we cannot say that there are significant statistic differences between the countries. And that's because the surveys were actually collected on different methods throughout the whole countries. And so we were not able to control this. And also differences in the survey. So sometimes some surveys presented different questions that we didn't spot earlier. Also, we have things that we cannot control are differences in culture and language nuances. So although we back translated it, there are some nuances in the language that we cannot control. So therefore, we can only provide an explanation of the models, but not actually statistically compare them, unfortunately. And to end, what we found is actually that the results for Southern Europe were different from our previous studies, so different from our studies in Belgium or in the UK. But the results from Northern and Central Europe were very comparable to these previous studies. We did also find that self-reported behaviors were positively influenced by peers, something that wasn't measured before, and not significantly influenced by intentions. Our limitations of this study is that there was no possibility for group comparison, as I explained before, and then some countries that did participate were excluded due to insufficient data, unfortunately. And what I also want to stress is these are preliminary results. So we are still doing some analysis because there are still some things that we need to figure out. So this is just some preliminary results that we wanted to present to you. And I want to thank everyone that participated in this very large project. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. I've seen again that there are several questions, but for time's sake, I will limit it to one quick question and one quick answer, please.
Yes.
So the question is, what is the effect of perceived infection severity on the adoption intention of the farmers?
Well, the perceived severity of Antalmantic threat? Or...
No, infection severity, so infection level or the perception of infection level by the farmer.
Well, we didn't include this in our survey, so I can't really respond to that. But I guess based on previous studies, we can say that actually if farmers have had problems before with worm infections and severe problems, and this is based on a qualitative study, so not on a quantitative study. So based on this, they would have more intention to engage in sustainable worm control, so in applying diagnostics. But this is based not on the survey results now. This is from a previous study.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Fiona. I would like to invite now the next speaker, Maiken Grafdal, who will give a presentation on treatment against helminths in Norwegian sheep, a questionnaire-based survey.
Yes, so first I would like to thank you for inviting me. My name is Maiken Grafdal. I'm a PhD student at NMBU, and I will talk about treatment against helminths in Norwegian sheep based on a questionnaire study. So first, a short introduction. Our project is called ARTIST, which stands for Antalmantic Resistance in Sheep Helminths. It's a 4-year PhD project in the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, NMBU, in collaboration with SLU, BioEPAR, INRA, and it is mainly financed by NMBU and Animalia. The objectives of this questionnaire survey were to obtain information on the current situation regarding management of major helminth infection in Norwegian sheep flocks, and also to identify flocks potentially at high risk regarding development of Antalmantic resistance. And selected flocks will be invited for further investigation. So here you can see a map of Norway and the counties. The questionnaire was sent out in the beginning of this year to the members of the Norwegian sheep recording system, to a total of 5,487 farmers, and they represent 40% of the sheep farmers in our country. A total of 1,378 sheep farmers replied to this questionnaire, and they correspond to 10% of Norwegian sheep flocks. And they represent all 11 counties. Vestland, Innlandet, and Rogaland had the highest response rate, and these 3 counties also have the highest sheep population in Norway. So the parasite control and fecal egg count. Most of the farmers responded that they are in contact with the veterinarian 1 or 2 times a year regarding parasite control, but the majority of respondents never check for parasites by means of fecal egg count in lambs or in ewes. Of those who check for parasites, it is mainly done based on suspicion due to symptoms. We asked about routines of Drenched gun calibration, and the most common practice was to check the Drenched gun if the farmer suspected that it didn't work, and under 10% reported that they never checked the accuracy of the equipment. And this seemed to be a positive development if we compare it with a previous study by Domke. And this indicates improved awareness among farmers regarding this. For dose estimation of Antalmintica, the highest proportion of farmers weighed a medium-sized animal and administered the drug based on this. And 14% reported that they use visual appraisal for dose estimation. And compared to the previous study by Domke, there seemed to be a declining trend for this approach. And 17% of the farmers weighed the largest animal. And these results also indicates improved awareness among the farmers. From the table here, we can see that the use of benzimidazoles have been reduced from 2018 to 2019 in these flocks. And the use of macrocyclic lactones, on the other hand, have been increased the last 3 years. And this may indicate reduced effect of benzimidazoles and possible resistance. 10% of the farmers reported that they suspected poor anthelmintic effect. When asked about the routines of treatment of newly purchased animals, 30% reported that animals were drenched before purchase, and 63% reported that animals were drenched after purchase. And over 40% answered that they don't have any form for quarantine, as you can see here marked by the red circle. %17% of the farmers reported to have Fasciola hepatica present in their flock. And 56% were unsure if this parasite were present in their flock. And for Haemonchus contortus, 8% of the farmers reported to have this parasite present in their flock, but it was a high uncertainty regarding the presence of this parasite, as you can see. And 11% reported that gastrointestinal parasites are an increasing problem in their flock. The purpose of treatment against nematodes was mainly prophylactic in flocks with no previous problem, over 50%, and in flocks with previous problem, close to 30%. And only 10% used it for therapeutic purpose. So a short summary in the end. 10% of the farmers suspected poor anthelmintic effect, and 11% reported that parasites are an increasing problem in their flock. And almost 65% of the respondents were positive to participate in further investigations. So for future work, we will collect samples from selected flocks to investigate the prevalence of gastrointestinal helminths, as well as the occurrence of anthelmintic resistance by using molecular methods such as ddPCR. Thank you very much for your attention, and I would also like to thank our partners and my supervisors. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maiken, for your presentation. Again, for time's sake, I will limit the discussion part to one question, although there were a few questions in the Mentimeter box. Apparently, there has been done a study by Domke et al. And previously, and the question was, were any farms surveyed in both studies, yours and the study by Domke et al.? And if so, were there changes at the individual farm level between the two time points?
We haven't checked the individual farmers yet based on that aspect, but that's something that we will consider.
If possible, by privacy rules, of course, to compare.
Yes, because we need to get data from that previous study about the personal information.
Yeah.
So I have to check if that is a possibility.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Yeah, it would be interesting to compare, I guess.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for your contribution. Now, this is the end of the short presentations. Well, we now go to the 1-minute poster presentations. And I would like to invite Lara Augusto to present her poster, please. And please keep stay aware of the time limit of 1 minute. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, good morning. I'm Lara, and I'm presenting the results on a survey on the knowledge and practices towards the control of helmintic infections. We managed to obtain a good amount of replies from across the country that allow us to conclude, among some other important points, that most of the livestock producer organizations deworm their flocks once a year, being ivermectin the most used product, that more than half of the veterinarians already doubted under some circumstances of the Antalmintic efficacy, and that more than half of the producers are not aware of the consequences of Antalmintic resistance. So this data supports the fact that there really needs to be an investment towards the dissemination of information to promote good anti-helmintic usage and correct deworming practices across the whole country. So for more information, you can go and check my poster for more results. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate and send them to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Interesting. And just within 1 minute. Thanks.
Thank you.
Next presentation will be given by Maria Martinez Valadares. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Edwin. Well, the aim of this study was to determine the effect of Antalmintic treatment on milk yield in dairy flocks with different levels of infection by gastrointestinal nematodes. So in this study, next, yes, thank you. In this study, we included 8 flocks naturally infected by gastrointestinal nematodes, 4 with low level of X per gram in feces before partum, and 4 with high level of infection. So the fecal count reduction test was performed in all of them with netomidine, including 2 groups, treated and untreated animals. All flocks resulted susceptible to the treatment. Ewes belonging to the low level of infection flocks produced 125 kilograms more milk than ewes with high level of infection. A significant and negative correlation was found between the mean X per gram before treatment and the mean milk yield per flock. In relation to the effect of intermittent treatment, in low level of infection flocks, the treated ewes produced 9.6% more milk than the untreated ewes. However, in high level of infection flocks, treated ewes produce less milk than the untreated animals. In conclusion, the treatment of flocks, even with low level of infection, can improve the milk yield. The lack of treatment effect in the high level of infection flocks could be due to the fact that the ewes continued grazing on the same pastures after treatment, resulting in high levels of infection during lactation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Maria. And the next speaker is Marcelo Molento. Marcelo, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Can you see me?
Yes, and I can hear you too. Thanks. Perfect.
Fantastic. So the title of my talk is meta-analysis looking for the macrocyclic lactones, but also with a second objective, which was to interview people and farmers to see if they have a different protocol for parasite control. So what we have done before was to go through the literature based on macrocyclic lactones resistance. So we gather a dozen of papers and we select them and to see what drugs they were using and etc. So you can see in this table the level of resistance after 21 days, and then the box you see the different dewormers based on macrocyclic lactones, which people use more than 10 times a year. Next. So then what we have done is to interview farmers for other protocols, and what was revealing was that they use more than 20 times to control ticks and hornflies. So what we are seeing is that drug resistance based on Helminth control is not the principal cause of drug resistance, even in nematodes. This would be due to a high level of drug use during the year for tick control and also for fly control. Okay, so this is it. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to see you all.
Now we are spot on time for the panel discussion forum, and I will share my screen to present the members of our panel to you. So I'm happy to have to present to you the experts that will contribute and participate in our discussion forum. We have Leslie Stubbings, who works at LSCC Limited, and she's a member and participant of SCOPS and an independent sheep consultant in the UK. Welcome. We also have Katarina Gustafsson, who is a sheep consultant at Farm and Animal Health in Sweden. Edwin Wouters is a senior researcher at the Flemish Institute for Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, and he's a project coordinator of the Disarm project on antibiotic resistance. He's from Belgium. And last but not least, we have Dave Bartley, the co-chair of Working Group 2 and a senior researcher at the Modern Research Institute in the UK. I'll stop sharing my screen. I would like to start. Well, for those of you that weren't here yesterday, the format of our discussion forum is different from what you might expect in a live conference, because due to the limited time, the concept of this discussion is more a webinar concept rather than an open discussion with the audience. However, do feel free to ask your questions in the Mentimeter. We'll first address some questions that were sent in advance, and if we have still time at the end, we will address then the questions that were asked in the Mentimeter forum and that received most votes. So don't feel disappointed too much if your questions will not be addressed in the forum, because we will address them afterwards and you will get a response to your question. I can promise that. I would like to ask the first question to Leslie Stubbings, please. What can we expect from communication to promote sustainable worm control, and what else is needed?
Thank you, Edwin, and thank you for inviting me to this panel today. It's been very interesting listening to the papers, because I think in answer to that, Fiona Van De Velde's paper really highlighted the fact that with Northern and Central Europe, the threat of anthelmintic resistance itself is not a real influencer in terms of uptake. So what I'd like to suggest really is that the sort of area that we're going to be concentrating on now is to move away from, if you like, the threat of anthelmintic resistance, i.e. the problem, and moving towards the solution, which is the uptake of sustainable practices. Our farmers don't, as we know, the awareness of anthelmintic resistance is now very high. But the threat of that is not enough to change their attitudes and to change what they're actually doing. We're asking them to make a quantum leap at times from practices that have been deeply ingrained, and indeed we as the scientific and veterinary community have encouraged them in the past to do. And so it's a confidence building thing that we need to do. And so we're moving more towards looking at the benefits of sustainable control, of which one of the side benefits is that we will be taking the pressure off anthelmintics. For example, the benefits of targeted selective treatments with the project, I think Fiona Kenyon's on there today, where we're looking at developing the TST algorithm within our Smartsheet project to not just give benefits in terms of reduced anthelmintics, but benefits in terms of actual animal performance as well. So I think it's this moving away from telling farmers what to do and, if you like, beating them up with anthelmintic resistance as a problem, more to trying to communicate to them the benefits of a more holistic, sustainable control.
Okay, that's interesting, because there was a similar question in the Mentimeter that was addressing this topic as well. And I don't know, maybe the question came from you. There was someone who suggested that perhaps rather than keep stressing anthelmintic resistance as a negative thing, farmers are bored with that, and they had antibiotic resistance first, and now people are bashing them with anthelmintic resistance. And someone suggested that in terms of communicating to the farmers, it might be more effective to present a solution, a positive message, like let's try to preserve the efficacy of the anthelmintics for the future.
Yeah, it wasn't me, but I'm glad I'm not the only one out there, Edwin. That's great. But I think, there is this thing that the problem with using the stick is that we know that anthelmintic resistance is an insidious process. So it happens over a period of time. The problem for most sheep, ruminant farmers, is that they don't see it as a problem until they have reached that, if you like, point of no return. And as we saw in the Norwegian paper, where 10% are now starting to feel things aren't so effective. So trying to get people to change when they don't perceive they have the problem is really difficult. But if we can emphasize the benefits in terms of overall management, and they're not just thinking about parasite control, they're not silo thinking about parasite control, they're thinking about and it's not always about profits. Increasingly now in discussions, we're talking about the good farmer concept. So what makes a farmer feel good about what he does? And that means he wants his stock to be healthy. He wants the confidence that what he's doing is going to keep his stock healthy, and he's going to feel at the end of the day, or he or she have done a good job. So it is taking that wider view to get this behavioural change that we need.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned in your answer the concept of sustainable parasite control, and I would like to ask Katarina Gustafsson, who's working with sheep farmers a lot. Well, we know that sustainability is based on 3 pillars. It's social sustainability, economic, and environmental sustainability. And my question to Katarina Gustafsson would be, what is sustainable parasite control for a farmer? Because does the farmer see sustainable control as the same as we do? Can you please comment on that?
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. I have talked to, well, first I would like to address that in our country, Sweden, you need a prescription from a vet to use your anthelmintics. And this means, and I think maybe that's, I think it's very good and maybe necessary to have the close dialogue with the sheep farmer. But I asked to form 2 big organizations, and one with the larger farms, the more commercial farms, they would like to emphasize, or they just said that the sustainable parasite control will happen when we can produce lambs without resistant parasites. And this would lead to a good economy and little use of Antalmintics, which is good for the customers and for the environment. And the other organization emphasized that sustainable control is possible when most farmers agree on the same priorities or same strategy. And this needs to include good economy, and it needs to include responsibility from the seller and the buyer, and this will need fecal sampling. And that's also included in this need for a prescription, because if a vet should subscribe the Antalmintics, they need a diagnosis before treatment. So we have lots and lots of diagnostic there's the cat fecal sampling in Sweden, and we have a close communication with the farmers on a several times per year discussing these questions.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned economics, and Leslie just told us that we shouldn't see parasite control as a silo, but it should be integrated in whole farm management. And in that context, I have a question for another member of our panel, Edwin Wouters. He's doing a lot of research on farm economics, and I was wondering what he thinks is the role of economics in managing Antalmintic resistance.
Thank you.
Or antimicrobial resistance in general.
Yes, I'm working much more on antimicrobial resistance. I think the role of economics is first conceptually and philosophically, it tells you, which sounds logical, but it tells you that every euro can only be spent once. It's very logical, but it's not, quite often neglected. And economics tells you that cost effectiveness is important. There are many different strategies and policies you can implement to reduce Antalmintic resistance or antimicrobial resistance, and they each have different costs for farmers, for the government, for policymakers, for companies, and they have different effectiveness in terms of reducing the use of antimicrobials and antimicrobial resistance. And well, they should be compared. Just to give an example, I think there is way too many money going to writing brochures and leaflets, etc. While I think that's quite costly to do, and the effectiveness of that is not very high. A second role of economics is that economics is one of the disciplines next to more social sciences, like Fiona presented, that can tell you and help you understand how actors make decisions and what can influence these decisions. And third, also conceptually and philosophically, it's discipline that also tells you that there is more than just communicating innovations to change behavior. There's also economic incentives like taxes or subsidies. There is regulation. There is tools. There is social norms, and they each have different costs and different effectiveness. And economics is kind of the discipline that helps you understand the differences between how effective and how costly these are. And then analytically and methodologically, I think it's quite logical. Economics offers you the tools to evaluate that and to compare the cost effectiveness of different measures. And just one example for antimicrobials, but that is actually quite comparable to climate change and the emission of carbon dioxide is. If you think of all the money that has gone into sense awareness raising and information and trying to change individual behavior, and if you compare that with the possible effectiveness of a tax on carbon or a tax on antimicrobials, I think we forgo several opportunities there to have even bigger effects.
Okay, thanks. So, okay. I can understand that the concept of that €1 can only be spent once, but doesn't that make the story more complicated to the farmer? Because if I understand you correctly, you're telling that okay, and also Leslie said that okay, Antalmintic resistance, or we have to think positively. improving or preserving Antalmintic efficacy is not a silo. It's related to other management decisions on the farm, because if a farmer decides to treat with Antalmintics, he cannot spend that money elsewhere in his farm management. So there's a competition between sustainable worm control and other farm activities. So we already struggle to get across the concept of sustainable worm control and preserving Antalmintic efficacy on its own. So making the story more complex by putting that into the framework of farm economics and farm management as a whole. How can we manage to get that even more complex story sold to the farmer?
Well,
or to the vet?
The thing is, maybe you don't necessarily need to sell something to the farmer. I think the key is to try to improve production systems, and sustainable worm control has one role to play in that, but there are other aspects as well. And probably if you, in trying to sell something to the farmer, if you focus too much, I actually think that's related to how you communicate these things, the discussion, the previous discussion. If you focus too much on sustainable worm control, maybe that's not a kind of a message that comes across to farmers, and the idea, and that's the economic way to look at a farming system, which is sometimes different than the veterinary way to look at a farming system. We look at the farming system more as a whole, comprised of several subsystems, and we try to improve that. We try to improve how inputs are being transferred into outputs, and to reduce bad outputs like bad animal welfare, greenhouse gas emissions, etc. And then sustainable worm control has just one role to play in that, besides many others. And yeah, maybe that is a more effective way to improve farming systems as a whole, and then to see what sustainable worm control what kind of role it can have to play in that. And in my view, economics can help you with that, to see the more systemic, to have a more systemic view on a farm or a farming system as a whole.
Okay, thank you. I have a question also for Dave Bartley. So we've been talking about communicating to farmers and behavioral change of the farmers, but is that enough to achieve sustainable parasite control, or do we also need new technological solutions? In other words, do we have the tools in our hands to help the farmers to really apply sustainable worm control, even if they want to?
Yeah, I think we have a lot of the tools, but I would go and agree with Erwin there, and Leslie and Katrina. You know, I think it's getting messages across. You know, it's getting the right messages across to the right people in the right formats and the right time. So I think yes, we have the tools there, but I don't think we've necessarily got across how we are going to get farmers to sort of listen to it. And the sort of research that's been going on, I think, you know, that sort of behavioral change is difficult to do. So I think we have the sort of, I think we need to marry sort of all of the stuff that, you know, Fiona and others have spoken about with the sort of technologies that we have available. I think tech in its entirety is very much going to be a part and parcel of it. I mean, you just need to look at how often we use smartphones and all the rest of these things to it as to, you know, how big a part that plays. So I think, you know, targeting treatments and the use of smart farming technologies, I think, is out there. But and I think we, as I say, I think we have a lot of the tools that we need already. I think we need to get those tools used to their advantage. And I think things like the fecal egg count are underutilized, you know, for both monitoring and for testing the efficacy of resistance. So I think we need to use both the old stuff as well as the sort of tech that's there.
Yeah, personally, I agree with you, and I think Jurien would agree with you too, as he presented yesterday the advantages of using fecal egg counts as a monitoring tool, which also fits in a positive story, like monitoring your infection status of your herd can help you to optimize your sustainable worm control and to preserve your Antalmintic efficacy. That doesn't mean that novel tools like to detect Antalmintic resistance using molecular tools wouldn't be useful, of course. I have a question. I'm now looking at the questionnaire box in Mentimeter. A question for all of you, and whoever feels happy to answer, please do. How much impact does animal welfare have in regard to the acceptance or non-acceptance of antiparasitics or sustainable worm control by farmers? So we have been talking about the threat of Antalmintic resistance as an incentive to change their behavior. We have talked about a more positive attitude towards monitoring to change their behavior. Economics are an important factor. But what about animal welfare?
Yeah, I think welfare is a huge part to it. I think, I think all farmers view the welfare and health of their animals as paramount. Yes, they are a production system, but I think, and I think some of the work that you've done, Edwin, what other people around them think is really important. So I think health and welfare is certainly something that farmers take very important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, going back to my good farmer concept, I think this is, farmers don't think about welfare, they think about what their animals look like. And that can be a positive or a negative for what we're trying to achieve here. The negative in terms of Antalmintic resistance is there is a tendency for them wanting to use a product, a medicine prophylactically in order to safeguard what they view as the welfare. On the other hand, if they're thinking longer term, which is harder, then they want to preserve the effectiveness of medicines should they need them in the future. So I think that is an important factor, but they're maybe not thinking at it as a welfare thing. It's more about how they feel about their animals, as Dave says.
Yeah, and the more pragmatic farmers think like, if my animals are happy, they also grow better, and it's better for production as well.
Well, but
I also agree with Leslie and Dave, because both the organizations in Sweden, they mentioned that for future possibilities, they wanted always to use something that did not affect the animal health and to have a good animal welfare.
Yeah, Erin, you were about to say something.
Well, the thing is, you could also try to make welfare much more important into the decision making. I think inherently many farmers, they do care about animal welfare, but of course within certain economic conditions, they are a production system. They want to be effective and efficient, and they want to achieve an income. And there are examples known about these quality labels for high welfare meat or high welfare milk products, where farmers get a premium which enables them to take welfare much more into account into their decision making. So it could be through an economic incentive, you could also make welfare more important into the decision making of a farmer.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Looking at Mentimeter, I have a question for Leslie now, which was supported by several people. So according to Fiona's presentation, community influenced the use of diagnostics to inform worm control. How can we as scientists help promote this community influence?
Yeah, I that was really good to see that. I think that is very important. And, in terms of one of the things about how do we communicate? I think community there, this is about confidence. This is about farmers working with other farmers and people that they trust. And so they get that confidence to take on board the new concepts. In fact, just this evening, I've got one group of farmers just like that who've been working together for a while now with a couple of veterinarians and so on. And we're going to get down into a lot of detail tonight about their questions. They're ready now to ask the questions, to move on. So I think this is very important, to feel as though you've got that support of like-minded farmers, people who are in the same position as you, but appreciating that you're each probably going to have a slightly different solution. And this is what sustainable control is about. It's not prescriptive anymore. It's about working through it yourself, and you do need that community feel and support.
Yeah, thanks. I agree. I have a question for Edwin now again from one of the Mentimeter. So based on the experience that the veterinary community has with antibiotic resistance for years now, and based on your experience as the coordinator of the Disarm project, how would the experience on antibiotic resistance, how could it help us to manage Antalmintic resistance in the near future?
Well, what we have learned in Disarm and also other projects regarding antimicrobial resistance, the first and very important precondition is that you have a group of stakeholders that you involve, that you talk with them, farmers organizations, individual farmers, government, public agencies, companies. You have to create a certain critical mass of people that regularly sit together and that are doing more than just talking, that are setting milestones, that are really proposing actions and changes to the whole system. And because this will create a critical mass, this will increase awareness, this will increase or this will result in more sensibilization of people. It builds capacities to try to do that. And then if we look at across Europe, there are huge differences in the average use of antimicrobials between sectors, and especially between countries. And you see the countries that have succeeded best in reducing antimicrobial use and improving the prudency of antimicrobial use. These are countries that have long ago started such a process, sitting together with stakeholders, also formalizing that in a way. In Belgium, Edwin, we know we have, it's called AMCRA. It's in sort of an institute which is permanent, which is doing that, which facilitates discussion groups, which sets milestones, provides advice, and the countries that have best succeeded, that are now really way below the median, are countries that have done this long ago. So this is a very important first precondition. You have to increase capacities in people and increase or produce a critical mass of awareness in people. And a second is data infrastructure in antimicrobial resistance. In fact, in theory, I'm not a huge fan of the trend to collect much more data. I think data is important, but data on its own doesn't do anything. Data needs to be transformed into information, and that needs to be transformed in advice. But anyway, it seems that in countries where they have a very good monitoring system to monitor antimicrobial use, that actually helps in getting this critical mass together in raising awareness. So that's really at the country level or at the regional level, you need to have something like that, a group of stakeholders supported by good data infrastructure that can regularly sit together and formalize that, not just a voluntary group of people that when they want to sit together, know something institutionalized. And then at the lower level on farms, what has been very, very effective is what in Disarm we are demonstrating, the so-called coaching approach. Just a coach who is not necessarily an expert on antimicrobials or on anything related to that, but who is kind of motivating the farmer, the veterinarian, maybe a feed advisor, others, to sit together, to think about the farm as a whole, to make a whole farm sort of a scan, and then to provide advice, very personalized advice. It is relatively costly, but the effectiveness is really huge. And it's not about disseminating a specific tool or disseminating a specific product. It's about really disseminating in a farm specific way what that farm can do to increase the health and welfare of the animals in a way that uses much less antimicrobials. And that is costly, but very effective. Just as a whole, the cost effectiveness, I think, is much higher than all the efforts to sell a product to farmers or to communicate a certain tool, one particular tool to farmers. That would be at two different levels, and my advice based on Disarm, and that higher level is really a precondition. Without that, the other levels will not happen. So you need to have that critical mass, and we see in many countries we have that, and they are really decreasing a lot, regardless of any products, probiotics, prebiotics. In fact, that doesn't matter. That's just a facilitator. But the majorly important thing has been this critical mass of people.
Okay, thanks. Leslie supported your view on bringing together the stakeholders, and as an example, she gave SCOPS in the UK, in the UK, of course, which we know, and is an example. A question maybe for Dave. So we can try to change farmer behavior and their practice, and to improve their uptake of sustainable worm control. But how do we measure our success? How do we effectively capture data to measure whether in a few years' time or a decade's time we have been successful in changing the farmer's behavior?
Yeah, I think. Thank you for that question. Yeah,
you can give a pass to any other member of the panel if you like.
No, I mean, I think measuring success, it can be done in multiple ways. I think we can look to see, are we changing practices? You know, so at a very crude level, are we seeing more of uptake of those things that we know are good practice? Albeit I don't necessarily like that term, but you know, things like, are things getting quarantined? Are we seeing better usage of the products? Are we seeing information being taken up? So I think, you know, I think there are ways of doing it, and I think questionnaires are probably a crude way of doing it, but it is out there. But we can, I think the other way is, can we see at a level productivity and sustainability within the industries? I mean, I think that's what we're all here for, is to try get the industry, you know, sustainable for the future. So I think, you know, that would be the other way of looking at it, is, are we seeing better return on investment at a farm level? So yeah, I think those would be ways of us looking at, are we doing?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thank you very much. Katarina, you're working in the field. How do you monitor whether your farmers' worm control is improving in terms of sustainability or not?
We base a lot on the fecal sampling, and since we also have seen a few farms with resistant problems, we are now giving the advice to also start with controlling their treatments, so that if they start with a fecal sample, that leads to a prescription of Antalmintics, and especially if it's a high account and if it's including Homunculus, we also give the advice to check after the treatment, did you get the good result you aimed for? So that's one important factor to pick up the farms with possible resistant problems. And if they don't go down to 0 EPG or close to it, we reach out to the farmers and check the dosage and the management, and maybe take it a step further to do resistant FECRT to check for resistance.
Okay, so fecal accounts and the number of prescriptions are two important parameters there, if I understand
Absolutely.
correctly.
But also to check after treatment, did you get the good result?
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you very much, all four of you, to participate in this interesting and lively discussion. But I know that Johannes has prepared a few questions in Mentimeter for all the audience, and I think he probably would like to present the results of those slides at the end of this meeting. Is that correct, Johannes?
Yes, Edwin, that's correct. I think it's maybe it's useful to show the inputs. Shall I share my screen?
Yes, please. So thank you again, Dave, Leslie, Edwin, and Katarina, for your participation in the discussion, and also thank you all the participants that send in questions to Mentimeter. I cannot thank you personally because it's anonymous, but thank you anyway. So Johannes, please go ahead.
Yes. So, so the first question, and you can still provide answers. Which policies are needed to address anthelmintic resistance? So we'll go over the comments in more detail later after the meeting. I'll just try to pick out a few of the raised comments. So what I saw was like co-creation also. It's very important. So together with all the involved parties, especially with farming community, information and formation guidelines for vets, involvement of governments and rules. Yes, so there's many on that. Economic incentives and so on. So please, if you have other comments, keep on providing them, and we will try to provide an overall summary in the meeting report. Now I have to find how I have to go to the next slide. Is it easy to find good information regarding sustainable parasite control? We have more or less a balanced situation, with half of the people thinking, yes, there is already a lot of information available, while another part thinks not. So it's also during the meeting, I think a lot of comments were raised, like how can we produce, let's say, a single document rather than doing a lot of repetitions. But there was also a comment like maybe it's not, there are enough leaflets and information that there, it's more working on the ground and together as a coach with the farmer to make the real change happening. Now, again, sorry, I have to change slides and I'm not sure if it will happen. Yeah, okay. What are your main obstacles to achieve sustainable parasite control? And I'm just reading the biggest words. Complexity is an important one. Lack of diagnosis, I suppose. So lack of uptake or good availability of good diagnostic tools. So there's a cost to it, and who's going to pay that cost? Information, communication, education, these kind of terms. So thank you very much. How can research contribute to better communication strategies? I read multidisciplinary teams, stakeholders, involvement, need simple, clear messages. Do more ring testing of diagnostic tests and so on. So again, please, I think I'm not sure, but I think that the links will stay open even after the meeting. So you may still provide inputs after that.
Okay, thank you all for participating in this Working Group 2 session. Looking forward to see you this afternoon for Working Group 3.